Hey, everybody, and welcome to your next. I'm your host, Jerome. And we're in the US this week. Last week we were in Canada, we were in Ontario, I believe. This week we're in LA, baby. I've got Daniel Rudyak with me today. And I tell you, I'm probably breaking rules because he's on the front side of his exit. But what this guy is building is crazy. And how he got to the place of building this is probably even crazier. So I want you guys to buckle up because this one's going to be a little bit different than what you've been getting from us in 2026. Daniel, how are you, brother?
Doing well, man. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I'm grateful. I know normally you'll see folks have these incredible exits and then come on. And so I know you're totally breaking your mold and rules. So I appreciate you doing that for me. I love hearing all the folks that you've had on and grateful that you are including me in your process here.
Man, so look, you said you clocked out at 2 yesterday, started back at 7 this morning. What in
Mhm.
the world has you working like that? That just sounds crazy.
Yeah. You know, um, I my career prior to this was very corporate. It was investment banking and private equity, and you hear kind of when you're a junior in the financial space, you'll work early on 80 to 90 to 100 hours. At least when I was starting, subsequent to when I started, I think work-life balance became more of a concept, and um, I don't know if that's worked backwards. But you kind of peel back. I think the reality is when you start something that you're truly passionate about, you don't get to execute that and really cause for a change and build something that you love, that you're proud of without putting in the hours. And so, am I tired 90% of the time? Yes. Um, do I wish I could just sleep more? And sometimes on the weekends, do I just hibernate for 15 hours? Yes. But I know that we're not going to be able to change as many lives as we already have and then continue to grow exponentially without myself, my co-founders, and the team putting in those hours. And we do it because we're passionate about everything that we do.
Man. So what problem are you solving?
Healthcare, which is a big one, especially in this country. And I'll say that at this time, we're attempting to solve US and not global healthcare. Our healthcare system operates in a very reactive way, which is what we've come to know over several decades. You get sick, you go to the doctor, you get prescribed. And we're really trying to push for an information driven, cool, and fun approach to preventative health. So instead of getting to a place where we have perpetual illness as we do in this country, it's really building healthy habits, healthy supplementation, and healthy information that's tremendously personalized in a cost accessible way from the comfort of your home, right? So that's what our super app and our partnerships with the most incredible compounding pharmacies and doctors provides for customers nationwide.
So it sounds like you're aggregating the information and then representing it to the subscribers of the service.
Great question. We don't want to presume that they didn't exist before they came into us or being a customer of Ready, right? So ultimately, we try to get as much as we can from the customers before they became our part of our community and members of ReadyRx, and use that to help inform decision making. And then once they're on, we take data inputs from their everyday life, their Apple phones or their Androids, their Aura Rings, their Whoops, their Apple Watches or Samsung Watches, their labs, whether they get them through us or externally. And all of these pieces of data help form an incredible picture of who you are um, without it being overly complicated. And then presenting that to them in a way that makes sense, that's not overly scientific, also very sensitive to not scare people. And then thinking about healthy habits and healthy supplements that are all ultimately doctor led and prescribed with health coaches and personalized meal plans just for that person. So there's no such concept as of here's a massive cohort and this is what works for them. Everything has to be personalized because everybody's so fundamentally different. That's what we do.
Wow. So this is pretty much everything except for the doctor. Like you're creating a treatment plan for the person without pretty much going to the doctor to get a prescription, it sounds
In fact, we have over 400 doctors in our network that we work with, and so everything is doctor prescribed that you would get through ReadyRx. So that one exception that you had, actually scratch that because it's included in ReadyRx. So the whole thing, including the doctors and clinical guidance. But we are really, really, that helps enable access, but we're really focused on your personal data and the products speaking for themselves to help enable you to live a longer, healthier life.
like. Why do you care? Like how does somebody get to the place where this is a problem they want to solve?
Yeah. The start of why I care was being, I think I was around 12 or 13 years old, and my father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and seeing how that impacted him from a neurocognitive way, his motor function decline was very traumatizing. He then had cancer, and I had a full yo-yo experience personally of doctors telling us that he's okay, then he's not, then he's okay. And it just felt like they were toying with a young boy and someone's life. Um, that was my first kind of traumatic experience with healthcare. The one that I think broke the camel's back proverbially is my fiance, um, who was told by two of the most prominent healthcare systems in the United States, based in Los Angeles, consecutively to go home and that she had a viral infection and she'd be totally fine until such time that she advocated for herself to not do so and get a scan. And then they retracted that and identified that she was septic and she had E. coli, and that had she gone home, she probably would have died, although they had told her to go home. That was the straw that broke the camel's back proverbially, and it was just very clear that we make subjective decisions, and that's fine. For many decades, is that we see patterns, we pattern match. In my fiance's case, they pressed on her stomach, she didn't scream, so they had no idea that her appendix burst and thought it wasn't necessary for her to get a scan, but it did, and they were wrong. And so that was a um, really emotional period for us. And um, one of my co-founders, his father had Parkinson's and dementia, and that was very difficult for him to watch. And it's shaped his experience with healthcare and how he thinks about life every day and how he wants to stay around more for his two young children. My other partner has been struggling with diabetes and Alzheimer's personally, and Alzheimer's in the family. So we're all deeply impacted by health and really are motivated to cause for a change in an accessible way.
Now, you did the deal, private equity. I don't think you said venture, but maybe it's venture,
Yeah.
startup world. Like you've seen it on the funding side, you've seen it from the board side. Do you feel like that prepared you to lead your company, ReadyRx?
Nothing could ever prepare you to grow a company from nothing to where we are today, over 10,000 monthly customers and growing. We talked about over 40% compounded month over month growth last year. And it's nothing prepares you for all the different types of duties and tasks you have to cover, the requirements to execute, how deeply personal it is. And we talked back to kind of why I was up till 2 in the morning last night. You kind of, as an owner, as a founder, you feel as though you have to get this mission accomplished. And when I'm not suggesting that being an investor is easy at all, I'm just saying it's completely different. And oftentimes, especially with venture, you do deep diligence on a company, you invest, and then you meet with the company every quarter, right? Like, and then you go find the next company, and you'll think about them and you'll offer them value where you can. That's very different from, say, we just opened up for our support team, a 70-person support team. So what systems do they use? Where's the office? How's it staffed? How do you optimize staffing? How do you make sure that they're trained in all the right products? Like, that's just one small facet of the business, right? Like, I've never been exposed to that. So it's really learn on the fly a lot. I will say I was fortunate in private equity to have been at large companies that own many companies, and I was a part of the buying, the operating, and selling. So private equity is a little bit more hands-on, but ultimately you have the managers executing everything. So I had some knowledge about best practices, KPIs, but it's very different when you're kind of in the weeds and sitting there and bringing these things to life. And I'd never had personal experience building tech like this before. So that's also completely new for me.
So what made you feel confident that you could go do this? Because it's hard, man. Like, you doing the hours in private equity is taxing just from a stamina standpoint. But if the investment doesn't work, the failure, there's an expectation for some of the companies to fail. This is a totally different beast. Like, the expectation and the challenge associated with that expectation, the bar is just a bit higher.
A lot higher. It's really interesting. This is like the entrepreneur starter founder dilemma. When you're just coming out of college, you really have very little to lose. So that's a potentially good time to take a risk. And then you start growing your career and you have this safety net. And as you get older and get more of that safety net, and then you get married and you have children, your responsibilities grow and you become more and more risk averse. So you see a lot less founders in their 30s and certainly in their 40s for that very reason. I think that while I didn't cover enough runway to keep me comfortable, I did start saving for this purpose. It's really tough because you never know when you go to market, you never know when things catch. And it took us over a year and a half just to build the tech before we even came to market, before a dollar of revenue was possible, and then get that dollar of revenue and start actually being able to change lives. So I definitely, I was risk averse and saved a little bit, not enough. But I just felt as though in what I was doing, I just didn't feel the passion, and I didn't feel like I was making a lasting change that I was proud of. I thought I was doing something really cool, learning about really awesome companies and really excited about it. So I think in order to do this, you have to be deeply passionate, and depending on your stage in life, you have to have an incredible life partner. And my fiance was my rock, Jerome. Like, I can't tell you, we had some massive ups and downs over startup period, and she was just such an incredible support system. And so I think for anyone who doesn't have a foundational support system, regardless of your age, it could be a very dark journey to get to some degree of success.
It's interesting you say that, because most guys I talk to, if we ask them, like, what do you need or what does support look like, they don't have an answer. They just feel like they're out there doing it on their own. Even if they aren't, that's the perception, is just like, it's my burden to carry. So what does that look like when you say foundational support system? What did that mean for you? How was it helpful?
Yeah, it's in and out of the workplace. So I, what I learned from my career is I love and thrive in team environments, not isolated environments. So I knew that I didn't want to be what's referred to as a solopreneur, right? I didn't want to be a single founder. And choosing before we started, I told you I had a startup when I was 19 years old. Choosing your partner is and or partners, so tremendously important. And you should be optimizing for people that are compassionate, but that are also smarter than you in whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so in the workplace, I had two incredible people who were in it with me, going through the same struggles, pushing for the same goal. And you kind of end up just motivating yourself, and then motivating them. And then they motivate you. And it's a circle. And you need that if you're building something big. I really think that you need that when you're building something big. But then you come home and you're exhausted. And just having, you need to give back to that person, whoever that person is in your life when you come home. Or if it's your friends outside of the workplace, you need to still have a little bit to give back. And for them to be unconditionally understanding, that unconditional element you don't find everywhere. And that's key. Because there are so many times she could have just been like, this is too much. I'm done with you. And not once did I get that, So I'm blessed in that way. I think that all of my co-founders are blessed in that way with their life partners. And we did have everything just worked perfectly for the foundation for it to work well.
Okay, so you said you spent like a year or 18 months pre-revenue building, just dumping it in.
Yeah.
Did you raise a lot of money? Like how'd you make it?
Before I answer your question, after that is you're eligible to get $1 of revenue. You're not entitled to it. And so at that point, it's like, okay, but now you got to make it work. And does your message, what you're trying to accomplish, does your message resonate? And that didn't hit overnight either, right? Like there were so many failures after we got there that we had incredible learnings from. And I think that what resonated from that perspective, time and time again, was the community that we built over time, the mission, and people's frustration with the overall healthcare system, with seeing their families, close loved ones impacted, or themselves. So that is what allowed us to win, but it didn't happen on day 2 of month 19 per se, right? And the answer to your question is no. It made things challenging. We did not raise $1. Did we have internal debates about it? Yes. Were we propositioned by a plethora of venture firms? Yes. But we're a democracy, and 2/3 always said no to the money. And there was a reason for that from the perspective, even in the tough times, which was this early on, we don't want what we're building. We don't want our decision making to be driven by financial KPIs. We want it to be driven by impact on lives and outcomes. And having sat on the other side of the table, I know how important it is to see those KPIs. And I understand, even, think about a company that IPOs, they have quarterly earnings, their stock price fluctuates. Well, that's short-term thinking innately. And so sometimes they're compromising the long term for the short term. And we didn't want to put ourselves in that position. Was it easy? Absolutely not. But yeah, to date, we still haven't raised. And now for the first time, we're finally, as these, conversations continue to come inbound for the right partners, we're finally beginning to entertain that.
So, I mean, it sounds like you did it as hard as possible. The relationships that you had from private equity, it seems like you could have leaned into that, but it
Oh
sounds
yeah.
like you turned away from it.
Yeah, and we have folks that we view as peers in the space who had nothing but a concept and very little to no revenue, who went all in on just raising a boatload of money. And it made us question sometimes, are we doing the right thing? And we are all confident that we did, because by that point we had already experienced quote unquote financial success, although once again, that's not how we measure success. And so we felt comfortable that we would, as we continue to grow, be able to really control the decision making. Our goal is to make that big tectonic shift in both culture and health, and in like the coolest way possible that everyone can understand and love. And yeah, we did everything with the most amount of friction. Um, did not get the pleasure of leaning into those relationships. And 2020 hindsight, I was the one of three that was pushing for it. 2020 hindsight, I completely agree with my co-founders.
Is it just because it reduced the pressure for performance, or was there another reason why you believe not raising and bootstrapping was the right way to go?
When you raise money early on, um, the intangible that it provides you is some form of self-validation. But in many ways, based on the inbounds, we already had that. So really what it does is you're giving away decision-making authority. And had we done that, I know that we would have, our product would look very different today than it does. So I feel as though we made the right decisions for the general population, for the mission and the goal. We probably would have cut corners or come to market sooner based on external pressures put on us that we just didn't have to deal with.
That's fascinating. So I think a lot of people go into their ventures when they have a passion and they're like, yeah, I don't know how it's going to make money, or I don't even think I can make money,
Mm.
but I want to do this thing. And, there's this problem and there's this group of people that I want to help, and it's a problem I want to solve. And if I can do that, then by solving that problem, I'll create value. And that value, then people will want to transact against. I don't think most people who come from private equity ascribe to that. I don't,
You're right.
the purpose is nice, but moral
You're right.
victories are overrated. You were trained to do something very different. So how do you turn your back on it?
I would look at it differently.
Okay.
I turned my back on the entrepreneur in me that started a company when I was 19. I turned my back on the 17-year-old who worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory while being a full-time high school student, to get a cushy, low-risk job where I was learning about a bunch of these different companies and scratching that itch. So I really turned my back on, for well over a decade, the entrepreneur in me, and just tapped back into that. What I learned are processes, systems, organization, but I never lost sight of my passions. What I learned is how to identify opportunities that are really cool, interesting, but also that have commercial viability. But it didn't fundamentally change my interests. And I think I just really needed that catalyst moment, like I experienced with my fiance, to take me over the edge. Um, but it isn't, look, you're right. I reprogrammed my brain for well over 10 years to think about businesses in a data oriented financial way, P&Ls. Um, Obviously, we had to think strategically about what the growth is in the business, their market and their market positions. How long can they maintain those? Can they grow? Um, do they have operating leverage? And these things were core, but that element of, and are they solving a major problem? As long as there was commercial viability, maybe wasn't the decision making factor in most private equity environments.
So, I kind of went extreme there. and say you turned your back on it, but I'm certain that you're utilizing the skills that you developed over the time that you were making investments and deploying capital that was expected to deliver a return. So how is that showing up in the way that you lead ReadyRx now?
Um, I would say going back to having that core foundation on the team at the workplace, we all have such very different backgrounds, right? We have a deeply tech engineering focused individual who's an incredible human being. We have a deeply product focused individual who's also an incredible human being. And then you have me, the finance guy, right? So when we have our weekly, daily, quarterly roundtables, you'll hear the voice that leads with tech, you'll hear the voice that leads with product, and you'll hear the voice that leads with ops, KPIs, and finance, all for the greater purpose. I do think that, you know, we have to think about finance, especially without outside capital. We have to think about the sources and uses of our money. And so that's where this really comes into play. And that skill set is, okay, now we've become capital allocators. With that incremental dollar, are we hiring more in a specific task? Are we putting a little bit more into marketing? Are we building a completely new tool? Are we launching something that's a completely different, like tangible physical product? So, and where can we make the most impact? That is kind of how you would think about it from a private equity perspective is what's the return of every individual dollar now that we can start to see those incremental dollars? That I think is you always have competing fundamental priorities, but the goal is the same. And we have to be really thoughtful as to how we allocate because we don't just have this big bucket to, play with. I would say that's the one dilemma with venture is a lot of people raise this crazy amount of money and they put on paper what they're selling as their uses. 9 times out of 10, they don't end up being the uses and they're like strong pivots. But they're not capital deployers. They don't know how to use that capital efficiently. And so they tend to way overspend on things and not be effective. And I think that's the capital raising dilemma. Another capital raising dilemma is that people, when they have a big war chest, really don't know how to they stop thinking about effective deployment of that capital. And not only for their investors, which are their stakeholders, but their customers. Like for us, it's, okay, how can we provide more value, like you said, to our customers? We ineffectively deploy a dollar, we're ultimately going to provide less value. So
Yeah.
that's how we think about it.
Yeah, I think resource allocation is an underrated skill.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and so people can very easily and quickly be wasteful if they're sitting in a space of abundance and it doesn't force resourcefulness and it
agree.
doesn't force thinking deeply about the problem and actually figuring out what the right mechanism is for solving the problem because it's easy, it's quick to just throw money at it and let somebody else worry about the problem. But when you have to choose kind of winners and losers, and it's funny because as a founder, very often like you're funding startup projects within the company and you're figuring out where the choke point is and how can we relieve the choke so that we can move to the next space. And I bring this up because I think while you're not post exit and you're not post IPO, what happens after people have a liquidity event is they have to really tap into being a resource allocator, right? Like many of them, they can push all their money onto Wall Street if that's what they want to do. But I find a whole lot more people are interested in doing some type of venture or private equity or even angel investing, but they haven't really picked up the skills to be successful at that. And so they think they sit on a board, they think they put cash here or there, and they end up in this place where they're not getting the return from their time investment or their capital investment that they were hoping. And then they look up if they're not careful and they're frustrated because they didn't create the outcome that they desired. And so it's really fascinating to see how the different stages of exit repeat themselves.
Well, I'm actually very curious. Do you see that post-exit liquidity and the resource allocation be different when you speak to founders in their mid to late 20s versus their late 30s or early 40s per se? Are there trends that you see, or it's kind of just all over the place?
Well, I think the people in their 20s and 30s, they feel like it's too early to be work optional or retired. So they're pushing it back in on their next idea. They're traditionally not pushing it to other people. It's like, I got this idea. I'm going to put this to the side so I know I'm okay. And then I'm just going to run the next play. As people, not so much in their 40s, but when they go 50s, 60s, they're a lot more patient. They're a lot more cautious. And while they're not really interested in building a new thing, they're picking who they want to invest in. They're looking for the 20, usually not 20, they're looking for the 30 something who's got the credentials, who's gotten kicked in the teeth a few times, and they can see that they're a fighter and they can figure it out. And in addition to that, they're resourceful and they're looking to help guide and mentor them. They want to find the younger version of themselves to connect with and go on a journey with. So, you know, very rarely do I see people push capital when they're early in the journey, and then later in the journey, they're a little more, I'll call it strategic, because, they don't have a whole lot of time to recover from a mistake.
And out of curiosity, those younger founders, 20s, 30s that do like reinvest in themselves on the next thing, did they come from that one liquidity event having already had money and invested in that startup and that's how they got the outcome, or did the money come from somewhere else?
Most of the people that we find, they bootstrapped it, and then at some point they may have taken money when they professionalized management and gave up their role as CEO so that they could move to more of a board role and separate their identity from the day to day of the business, because that ends up being pretty tough, especially once you get over the 10 or 15-year mark. Um, so usually it's going to be late capital, not I walked in. In fact, like my mouth dropped when you were talking about people raising a lot of money with the idea of no revenue. Like I don't. I'm not a Silicon Valley guy, and even not even an LA guy. So the thought that people are pushing cash into ideas and not proven is something that I don't have a ton of experience with.
Yeah. And the beneficiaries of that are those companies, obviously, that have no necessity to prove execution, and their valuation is predicated on something completely made up. Um, but I think that there, this speaks to the capital dilemma, which is the venture world has become so competitive and there's so much money looking to be deployed. And so finding good deals, this is another thing I was thinking about in private equity and venture before I started here, and it's only gotten worse, is when you're at a big private equity fund, um, you'll buy a big name department store, baseball team, or soap manufacturer. And then what do? You hold it for 5 years and then you sell it to another big private equity firm. And by the way, the limited partners or investors in the funds, they're the same. So the end owners are the same and they're just tossing it between each other, right? That's the dilemma there, is that there's just the structure is all wrong, right? So you have these dated funds. So after a certain time, you must sell, even though clearly you have room to grow and there's a need to keep the asset. Same thing with venture is that there's just too much capital in the system, more people wanting to get involved, and they're all chasing the same deals. And that leads to very, at times, poor decision making because you have this negative bias to need to deploy the money. And if you don't, then you're not going to raise another fund. And so when I was seeing this all play out and just get worse and worse and things get more and more competitive, I was also thinking to myself, this is an auction process and it's become very difficult to stand out as an investor. And I don't envy the folks that will continue to do this for 10, 20, 30 more years because I foresee it personally just getting more and more and more competitive. So it's just like going to Sotheby's or Christie's and participating in an auction and saying, hey, yeah, I'll bid that much. Right. Like that's kind of there are angles, but that's what it's becoming.
And it's I'm going to call it disappointing, right? Because when you think about the best company wins, at least that's the concept going in, many times the best company isn't even getting a look, right? Like, I mean, people are
Exactly.
boxed out of the auction unless they've, got their placard where they registered and they can get in. And
Exactly.
some of that's engineered, but how do you overcome that? And I think much of it is, well, you bootstrap it. You do it
Yeah.
outside. You do it with the friction versus trying to make it as smooth and as easy as possible.
But that like the reason I say that is to your all of your founder listeners who are thinking about a liquidity moment, have just had one. Jerome, you said something very profound is like a lot of these 20 and 30-year-old founders, they'll start a business, they'll operate a business. That's a specific skill set. And then they'll say, and now I'm going to be a venture investor.
Mhm.
Right. And the big question is, well, what about the folks that have been doing it for 15 years that know a lot more than you? What makes you think from being a founder that you're going to outperform them? And that leads to this outcome disparity where you're kind of at the end of it, not getting the outcome that you probably want 5, 10 years later. And so it's just interesting for me to hear that. Although I understand it and I've seen it firsthand. And then the other thing that I point to is, well, taking a large amount of money, if you're exiting and you're personally taking home 10, 50, 100 million and reinvesting it in yourself. And I find that interesting as well because, well, you just created a business that you bootstrap with a lot less. So if you believe in yourself, couldn't you replicate that? And do you need $20 million or $50 million? Why don't you risk down as a founder with an exit and and have an ability to replicate what you've done? That's my thought process for founders with liquidity and how I would be thinking about, although we're nowhere near thinking about liquidity because there's just so much room for us to cause for very material change and impact. But that's how I would be thinking down the line. And I'm excited to, we'll have, I'm sure, many conversations in the future, but I'm excited to 5, 7 years down the line, have another one, revisit this specific conversation and say, I was wrong or I was right.
I, your thesis is already proved out. You're right. It's just a matter of the confidence, right? So early on, I asked this question, and I think you answered it well. It's like, what made you feel like you could do this? Because like you see it, but you don't actually get to touch it. Like you're not really in it because you're not the operator, right? You're just the
Exactly.
money, and you're holding people accountable. You want the return. Um, and so you said, well, kind of, I didn't know. I wasn't prepared, but I
For sure.
was willing to slog through it, right? I'm committed to the outcome, and I've got a why that's bigger than all the why nots that show up. And that includes not sleeping, that includes neglecting my partner, includes. and I'm committed to this.
Yeah.
Now, you could wake up one morning and say that you're not, but the fact of the matter is you're committed to it. And so, as long as you continue to run down that path, I think there's a huge opportunity for growth. And as long as you don't flame out or burn out, or get to a place where like you're so convicted that you're not able to look at the data and make decisions that make sense as it relates to what you guys are building, I think you're going to be more than fine. And then you don't have the burden of having to do something for quick cash or a return, or feeling like you guys are going to get fired because the investors are fed up with the thing didn't work, or you try this. It gives you more creativity. I'll never forget when I did my first private equity deal, and I told everybody that was a partner in that deal, like, this isn't about maximizing return to shareholders. And if that's what you want, this isn't the deal for you, because we're going to do things based on what's right from our perspective. And we're not going to make the money based on decision, make the decision based on money. And I was like, and some people sat back in their chair and they had to reconsider whether or not this was the game for them, because conceptually, you're doing it to make money. But there comes a point where fulfillment is more important than money. And it sounds like that's the path that you're already running down. And there's an opportunity when you're running down that path towards fulfillment where you can actually experience this this feeling that is elusive for so many people. So many people think that money is the game. And if I get enough money, everything else is going to get figured out. And I will actually experience this bliss that I'm seeking. And it's my belief, and I feel like I've got enough data to support this, that money's never going to solve that problem. Is actually executing against the problem that you've been placed on the planet to eradicate for the people that you have an affinity for, and really executing against and fulfilling your purpose. And so I'm excited to see somebody so young working in that vein. And I think as long as that flame is burning bright for you, it won't ever get too dark, man.
Well, you use me as a data sample here. I don't know that it's the appropriate compensation. And candidly, seeing the development with AI, I don't know what a junior role looks like in private equity going forward. But when I was doing that, we were very well compensated.
Mhm.
And so I came from the money didn't do it for me.
Yeah.
I came from a very comfortable situation and not feeling content.
Yeah.
Right. So like I already experienced that. So use me as a data point where it doesn't I've met very few people, if money is the primary motivator, that haven't, like, if you say, hey, what's your number? And then if they reach that number, that they don't reset the number. Yeah, exactly. So like there is no number. And
Mhm.
the reason there is no number is because you're not getting the happiness. You're not going to get the feeling of content from it. It's just, the car's not going to do it. The extra 3,000 or 4,000 square feet in your house isn't going to do it. Like all these things, a specific kind of watch, not going to do it. It's feeling, it goes back to having that support system. It's feeling that you're doing something that you're excited and passionate about, both at work and at home. And if you have that, the other things are really nice to have, but you're never going to get that consent from it.
It doesn't ever happen. And this is the fallacy with the liquidity event that everybody chases. After the weekend, the first weekend after the money hits, the money being there doesn't matter. It's like air, right? You don't notice that you have air because you're just breathing. You notice when you don't have air. And this is the misnomer. It doesn't step increase the quality of your enjoyment of your life. Sure, you might be able to fly private. Sure, you get a AP instead of a rollie, but like it very quickly diminishes. And what we tell people regularly is you can't use pre-exit problem solving techniques to solve post exit problems. And so yeah, I'm really glad that you figured that part out. And while you haven't said it, I suspect you've gone from being really comfortable when you had your job to being really uncomfortable and working more with less money on your journey of building and solving this problem for everybody in the US.
Yeah, it's you know, there are many specific moments I can call to, and one is just like always sits with me, and I share it all the time because it's just so egregious. But there was a moment in time specifically that just I will absolutely never forget, where, coming from my background, coming from everything that, my career, my fiance, well, first and foremost, I've been engaged to my fiance for over 4 years, and this is why, right? Like, it's because we couldn't invest in a wedding. One, but two is there's a moment in time where she was like, I'm craving my favorite tacos tonight. And these tacos, like, two of them are $8. And I said, I can't do that right now, you know? Um, and like, that's just like saying it now is crazy. Saying it before was crazy. Saying it now is crazy. And it'll always stick with me because you're telling the loved one that you can't get her two tacos from her favorite taco spot, because of your sacrifice that she's on the journey with you on, and like all this stuff. So it's a really visceral feeling. And you're right. I don't go too deep into that, but there were definitely low lows and peaks and troughs. It's funny. I was at this place called San Vicente Bungalow. It's like a members club that a friend took me to last Thursday. And there's a 27-year-old kid at our table, and he's a Stanford grad. And 3 days prior, he had sold his AI business for a little over 100 million bucks. He took home around 20 to 30 million dollars, and we were talking about it. And he's sitting there telling me that this money is sitting in my bank, and I just have absolutely no idea what to do with it and like how to think about this. And I think that conversation, if you're 27, 37, 47, and all those instances would be so fundamentally different. Um, and as a founder, being prepared for that, I think, is so important. And starting to deeply think through what that looks like and what's important for you and where you drive happiness is such an important concept to meditate through, regardless of if the outcome has already happened or not.
Yeah, we find it's really difficult for founders to figure that out on their own. Like, again, exiting to something versus exiting from something, which is what just happened for him, is the fastest way to get yourself in trouble. You can make a whole lot of poor decisions in the exit process on the backside of that peak if you're not careful, and just ruin or undo everything you did climbing up to that peak. On the way down, like when you think about climbing Kilimanjaro or some of the other really tall mountains, most people don't die on the way up, they die on the way down. And so we think about exiting and liquidity events in a very similar fashion. You're building, you're scaling, it's hard. It's much more difficult to go up. The air is getting thinner, it's getting even harder. You finally summit, you get the liquidity event, everything looks different. And then you got to make your way back down because that's the only way to get to the new thing. But in your descent, you experience all of these emotions. You kind of let your guard down because you accomplish or achieve the goal. And then there's this deflation on the backside of it because you thought it was going to give you something and it didn't actually give it. And you realize that the way up was the real prize and the lessons you learned along the way. And so hopefully your dinner mate gets a chance to check this episode out because I think we can definitely help him with some of the things we shared today. Um, And you're wise behind your years, brother. I'm really excited for what you guys are building, and I wish you tremendous success. We've covered a lot of ground today. What's the one thing you would like for listeners to take away from the episode?
Surround yourself by people who will unconditionally be supportive of you, whether you're just starting your journey, you're climbing your way to the top, you're at the peak, or you're coming down. Really positive decision making takes place when you have people who care about you genuinely and aren't there for you for the wrong reasons. And so if you're a recent startup founder that just recently exited, or you're starting something new, relationships matter. And I think about this in the same way I think about the blue zones, which are the master study on longevity and these little pockets of Italy and Japan where people live the longest. One of the core elements to that is a consistent community that is supportive of you and that you care about as well. And not only will this be great for you as you live your life, but it will help you extend your life and live a longer, healthier life.
Wow. Wow. We find that people who exit loneliness is one of the things that really beats them up on the other side of not having any purpose. And so I think those words are really wise. Daniel, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, man.
Jerome, thank you so much for having me.
To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.